So, hello everyone. I had not heard that I am a godmother again. What a very exciting designation. Um, Thank you for that introduction. I'm so happy to be here with you all today, talking about the history, the past, the present, and the future of ABA in Saudi Arabia. I'm so proud to be a part of the first Al-Hekma ABA Symposium, and really especially be pleased to be speaking as we approach the first World Behavior Analysis Day. It's really wonderful for the science of ABA to be so publicly acknowledged in these ways. A special acknowledgement to Dr. Lamis, the leader of this symposium and the leader of ABA at Dar al-Hekma, and Dr. Shahad, my moderator, a person who actually figured quite significantly in my journey of ABA in Saudi Arabia. So speaking about the past, the present, and the future of a science, that's a little bit daunting. On the other hand, these two professionals exemplify all of that. And so I'm very proud to be here representing a little bit about the history of ABA in Saudi Arabia. So for some context, some real defined context, I first arrived in Jeddah in 2007 for two events I'll describe later in a little bit more detail, but the first was the annual symposium of the Jeddah Institute for Speech and Hearing, at which I spoke about the use of the ABLES assessment with children with autism, and a 1-week intensive class, a graduate level class on ABA principles that was given to the employees of the Jeddah Institute for Speech and Hearing. Now, I will tell you that my coming to Saudi Arabia was a very last minute decision. Someone else at Simmons College, where I was a professor, was actually supposed to go. And for a variety of circumstances, I went instead, subsequently moving full-time to Jeddah in 2008. So I guess that's a really kind of interesting historical fact. You see, the thing about the history of a science is it's not really the history of any individual person or even any small group of people. A science has its own path, and individuals like myself and so many others who've been a part of the history of ABA and Saudi and in the world simply have traveled that path concurrently for a period of time, and frankly are very, very fortunate to have done so. My path did cross the history of ABA in Saudi Arabia, and today I'm going to take some time to fill in some of the details about that history so that we can all learn a little bit about the unique sequence events that constitute the past, the present, and hopefully the future of ABA in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Now, as a professor and director of a graduate program, I strongly believe, as emphasized by the 19th century philosopher Auguste Comte, that to understand a science, it is necessary to know its history. History offers us just so much understanding of our circumstances today and helps us to determine the path for tomorrow, which will become the history of the future. Jen Bristol in 2014 did well by all students of science to exemplify these 10 reasons why the history of a science matters. Now I'm going to paraphrase a few. History teaches us what the world was like before we had our current level of understanding about a philosophy of a science or about the events of today or about the cultural context of those events. Ask yourself, for example, what was ABA like in Saudi before there were BCBAs or ABA centers or graduate programs? If you assume that the journey had not begun, you would be missing some of the early discoveries and how they were made and how so many great men and women went to substantial effort and stepped outside the box to further the science. Talking about history in events like this symposium, it's a way to bring those events alive. Critically, history can also teach us quite a bit about how science advances and was influenced by culture. We can understand ourselves as a culture of scientists if we can understand a bit of the history that preceded us. So on that note, let's explore a little bit of the history of ABA in the world and in Saudi, shall we? The history of ABA in Saudi is not isolated or disconnected from the history of ABA elsewhere. Consider, for example, the many, many events in B.F. Skinner's life that resulted in his founding of the field of applied behavior analysis. Ironically, Skinner was initially an English major who wanted to be a writer. But initially, he failed at his own chosen craft. Now, many degrees and inventions and experiments later, it is his writing about his experiments that continue to influence behavior analysts all over the world, including behavior analysts in Saudi Arabia. Consider also, for example, the founding of the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, our seminal source of information in our field, or at least one of them. Brian Iwata has been quoted as saying, anyone interested in conducting applied behavior analysis should be a student of JABA. Montrose Wolf, yes, that Wolf of Beowulf and Risley fame, who actually was the first editor of JABA, writes in 1993 that in the 60s, he and his colleagues wanted a new journal desperately, because if you can believe it, no other journal would publish their applied work. Now, apparently, it was Nate Azrin, he of Toilet Training in a Day fame, who went to a meeting of the Society of Experimental Analysis of Behavior. They had a journal, by the way, and he advocated for a new journal for applied practitioners. Now, apparently, Dr. Azrin had the trust of the board, and Montrose Wolf states in his writing about the founding of JABA that without Nate Azrin's support, there would have been no JABA. Envision our field in that type of situation. Brian Iwata actually also states in his writing about JABA that he first learned about ABA when he was assigned JABA articles in a graduate psychology class taught by none other than John Bailey of Bailey and Birch fame. So how's that for a little history lesson? Many of us can easily recognize the relevance of Ivar Lovaas's work at UCLA and the implication of that work on our field. I can actually recall in the 90s speaking to a group of special education administrators about ABA, and I introduced the Lovaas study to them and the results of that study. And when I displayed those results, one of the special ed directors covered his eyes and candidly said, "This will change everything in special ed." Now, there are too many events in the history of ABA to represent on one slide here in a very short period of time, but let's recognize the last event for a moment, the creation of the Behavior Analyst Certification Board in 1998, not that long ago. That creation is credited almost exclusively to Jerry Shook, and all its contributions to the field today simply cannot be emphasized enough. There are few events in my ABA journey and the journey of so many others, behavior analysts in the world and in Saudi, that have been personally as significant and as exciting as achieving the designation of a board certified behavior analyst. Few events have moved the science ahead so much and so quickly as the creation of the BACB. The history of a science can also be defined in part by its publication history, and ABA has a rich history there. Early ABA publications are typically credited to Skinner, but these first and founding publications too had antecedents, like Thorndike's Law of Effect, for example, as well as several publications pre-Skinner's work, demonstrating the applications of behavioral principles to various problematic behaviors, such as Mary Jones's study titled A Laboratory Study of Fear, the Case of Peter, which was published in 1924. Now, while not adhering to the 7 dimensions espoused by Beowulf and Risley, it is an early example of behavioral application published in the literature. And then there are the superstars, the men and the women, the great men and women of our field whose actions and success brought us, each in their own way, to the place where we are today. B.F. Skinner, of course, but Fred Keller too, who's not only known for his development of the behavioral education system, PSI, but apparently was responsible for convincing B.F. Skinner that he could make an experimental science out of the study of behavior. There's an event we haven't considered the significance of enough. Nate Azrin, Montrose Wolf, Jerry Shook, all of whom I've referenced, and closer to our journey here in Saudi, Neil Martin, Linda Hayes, Maria Malat. Each of these individuals are a part of the history of ABA. Each has joined the journey of ABA for some period of time, and hence each is a part of our story and our path. Later in this symposium, you're going to be hearing directly from Dr. Martin and others how these events have influenced the field of ABA today. The rise in the demand of ABA services has led to an increase in the number of higher education institutions delivering instruction in ABA, resulting in exponentially increasing number of BCBAs in the world. Dr. Grant just talked a little bit about that relative to the increase in the number of master level practitioners. Definitely needed, significantly influencing our field. Every time I look at this graph, I think of how rapid it shows the growth of BCBA certificates, and certainly the growth was rapid. But I gotta say, at the moment, it felt like we would never reach representation in service delivery that we so sought. And each achievement of each individual person of that credential was like climbing a mountain. The field has advanced in regards to overall regulation as well, and how critical this has been relative to the advancement of applied behavior analysis. And this effort continues both in the world and in Saudi Arabia. It was only in 2009 that the first US state of Oklahoma passed regulations on licensure for ABA practitioners. So these events are likely to be not only a part of our recent past, and perhaps our long ago past, but a significant part of the future of applied behavior analysis. Now let's switch to a glimpse at the journey of ABA in Saudi Arabia. Here I've created a timeline of some significant events in that history. Now, please keep in mind that a timeline is just a snapshot created by an individual person representing events that that person perceives as significant. The events I've reflected here, in my opinion, are very meaningful to the development of ABA in Saudi, but also I acknowledge meaningful to me and to those I knew who guided the development of ABA during the past few decades. Few people in Saudi Arabia today may actually be familiar with the early efforts of Noor Al-Qasab, so I'm going to begin there. In 2001, before there were BCBAs, any higher education programs, or even any centers providing ABA services, Noor Al-Qasab, a special educator living in Dhahran, received an international development grant from the Association for Behavior Analysis International. Now, Al-Qasab had encountered ABA while searching the literature for empirically validated treatments for his child who had developmental disabilities, and he subsequently applied for a grant to advance ABA in the region. He used the grant money to establish the first ABAI chapter in the Middle East called Middle East ABA. That was established in 2002. And then in 2003, he organized a delegation of experts with the assistance of ABAI staff and Dr. Maria Malat. And a delegation of experts traveled to the region in October of 2003 to provide training and promote long-term establishment of ABA in the region. The delegation included some participants whose names you may recognize: Dr. Linda Hayes, Dr. Kent Johnson from the Morningside Academy, and Dr. Maria Malat among them. On that trip, the delegation traveled to Bahrain, Saudi, and Qatar. The central activity of that delegation was the first ABA conference in the Middle East region, as well as some specialized seminars, one of them by Dr. Kent Johnson, and several networking activities. So Al-Qasab certainly was one of those whose great outside the box thinking and devotion to the science of ABA enriched and contributed to the history of ABA in Saudi Arabia. Now, travel forward to 2005, where the Jeddah Institute for Speech and Hearing, which was owned and operated by Madame Sultana Al Riza, sponsored a workshop by a clinician from the McCartan Center, which is located in New York City. Now, sponsoring workshops, not an unusual event for JISH or for many organizations in the Jeddah area, and actually might not have even made it onto this timeline if not for the fact that in the audience that day sat a young woman named Shireen Basfar, who worked at the rehab division in JISH. Now, Shireen had been working at JISH for several years and had already made plans to study speech language pathology at the graduate level. But she had a really keen interest in working with children with behavioral challenges. And people at JISH used to draw her in to assist with their cases because she was just so good at influencing problematic behavior and teaching alternative adaptive behaviors. So that day, sitting in the audience, Shireen heard that there was a science of behavior and a professional practice based on that science called applied behavior analysis. Shireen changed her mind that day, deciding to study ABA instead. She moved to Boston temporarily to study at Simmons College and received her BCBA in 2009, becoming one of the first BCBAs in Saudi, and returning to Saudi then to assist in the growing JISH ABA division. So 2007, referenced on this timeline, is when my journey crosses the timeline, as I previously noted. In addition to the two events that I referenced participating in 2007, in 2008, under the direction of Dr. Mirvat Tashkandi, we developed the first verified course sequence at Al-Hekma College. It was Al-Hekma College at the time. We had great support in that effort. And it was a very exciting moment to have the first VCS approved in Saudi. Now, the first cohort of students in that program included some of today's leaders in ABA Saudi Arabia. Wafa Al-Johani, Lena Al-Shwayman, Sarah Sisala, Banan Al-Azam, Shahad Al-Sharif, among them. There were many others. Most of this cohort went on to study ABA at the graduate level, and they are among your leaders today. Now, at the same time, Al-Hekma graduate Mona Al-Haddad was in Texas studying special education. And she was contacted by Dr. Mirvat Tashkandi, who encouraged her to change her focus to applied behavior analysis. Mona then extended her studies in Texas to complete the course sequence in ABA, returned to Jeddah, finished her supervision, and avidly supported both the verified course sequence and the development of the practicum courses at both Jeddah Autism Center and Jeddah Institute for Speech and Hearing. So there are all these concurrent events happening at that time that have become part of the history of ABA in Saudi. Now, in November 2008, a mere 2 months after I relocated to Saudi, we opened the doors to the JISH ABA division. And we did so both to serve children with ASD, obviously that was our primary goal, and to support the other services that were provided at JISH by helping the employees there develop skills relative to teaching and managing children with severe behavior problems. Another goal we had, of course, was to develop practicum locations, JISH Center being one of them, for the students of Al-Hekma. In fact, the first employee of the JISH ABA division was Shumaila Jaffrey, the second, Sana Ibrahim, both presenters in this symposium today and tomorrow, and 2 early BACB certificates in Saudi. Now, during those years, dissemination was a major focus, along, of course, with the development of service delivery systems. And Al-Hekma and JISH and And the group of ABA practitioners working there presented many workshops for local and regional organizations. One such workshop, which was on the use of functional assessment and function-based treatment, was held at ALJ Hospital in Jeddah. In the audience there was Ahmed Eid, who subsequently moved to Riyadh to study ABA through a partnership between the Center for Autism Research and the University of Reno in Nevada, that partnership being established in 2014. Though that first cohort graduated a few years later, and many of its graduates are now leaders in ABA in Saudi Arabia. Each of these individuals devoted a significant amount of their lives to learning the science of ABA so that they could go on and advance the science in the community, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. There are many more events that we could reference. In 2012, a second international dissemination grant was received by actually Dr. Michelle Kelly, who was a Dar al-Hekma professor at the time. That grant was used to conduct a major translation project, which involved translating some key ABA resource documents like the BACB task list, the ethics code, from English to Arabic, and to advance the possibility of offering the BACB exam in Arabic. The project was undertaken by the leadership of Dr. Kelly and Mona Haddad, along with Ingiela Riza and Bethany Kondo, and probably most of the students of the Dar al-Hekma program. Now, as I said, there are many, many other events that occurred during those years. It's really hard to represent them all on a single slide or in a single timeline. In 2013, a new ABA chapter was formed, ABAI Saudi Arabia. In 2015, the first RBT training was held in Saudi. A young man named Yasser Al-Jaidi was in attendance at that training. And he flew in every day from Riyadh to Jeddah to attend the RBT training. Now, if you know Yasser, you know that this persistence is not surprising. During that period of time, he was frequently involved by attending sessions and observing ABA sessions, absolutely insistent at receiving ABA training in his home country. And Yasser's persistence is indicative of the devotion and the persistence and the commitment of so many people that I have encountered and that I did encounter during my traveling of the path of ABA in Saudi Arabia. Of course, in 2018, Dar al-Hekma's master's program was developed and received VCS status, facilitated by Dr. Lamis and Mona Haddad, later joined by Dr. Sarah Sisala, who you might remember me mentioning was a student in the first cohort of the Dar al-Hekma VCS, started back in 2008. So you can see the journey here comes full circle. There have been several publications too, defining our history and success along the way. One of these publications actually chronicles the history of ABA in Saudi Arabia. This publication effort, led also by Dr. Kelly and a group of practitioners involved in the development of ABA and applied behavior analysis and autism services in the GCC and throughout the Middle East. Now, like the history of ABA in general, there are too many individuals involved in the history of ABA in Saudi to name. I know that I've named some of them, and I'm sure that I've missed many, many others. Each of them influenced the field and a part of what ABA is today in Saudi. Among the many events that occurred, not all were successful. It sounds, I'm sure that I am representing that period of time as a period of growth and commitment and success, and it was in so many ways. But also, it was a period of frustration and trials, and many of the goals we had were frankly ill-informed and a bit lofty. Some were virtually impossible to achieve, or at least seemed so at the time. But we persevered and planned and continued forward and brought others into our history. And this, frankly, brings us to today. So this symposium celebrates ABA today in Saudi Arabia. The number of certificates continues to grow. When I left Saudi Arabia for the last time, there were 12 certificates listed on the BACB registry. Yesterday, I noted there are 104. I follow that registry because for me, it shows a continued growth of a science that proceeds on its own path. The number of centers offering ABA services continues to grow, as does the number of higher education opportunities. Graduate education is more available for individuals, although certainly probably not available enough. Credentialing and licensure initiatives are underway. Led, I understand, by Dr. Faisal Al-Manari in Riyadh, among others, pursuing those outcomes. The JISH ABA division continues, having affiliated with the Carbone Center from Dubai and New York, led by Inas Abdullah and Sana Abrahim, with continued support from families, from Madame Sultana, and from General Manager Ihab. These initiatives have taken hours upon continued hours, building up to years to continue. The history of a science really does not pause when one person on the path veers onto another path. Indeed, the best that we can hope for is that while we are on that path, our actions influence the outcomes and contribute to the direction of that path. Fortunately, the principles of behavior guarantee, for better or for worse, that that is likely to occur. In many aspects, the future goals of ABA in Saudi Arabia, as communicated to me by so many of the current leaders of ABA practicing in Saudi, are very similar to the goals that existed in the early days of ABA in Saudi, and really perhaps remain the goals of ABA worldwide. Culturally sensitive, socially valid, and affordable service delivery for anyone who would benefit and anyone who would want such services, sufficient supervision, excellent supervision, contributions to literature, completion of research, publications, monitoring of the quality of practice, advancing of efforts to regulate the practice and develop licensure and certification programs regionally, more availability of higher education, more availability of doctoral level higher education. You know, I have a memory of probably a month or so after I arrived in Saudi Arabia, Dr. Linda Hayes also visited again and gave a workshop on the future of ABA in Saudi Arabia. And her emphasis in that presentation was the critical need, not just to produce practitioners, although that was a critical need at the time, but also to produce leaders, individuals who can advance from a scientific perspective, the contributions to the scientific field of ABA from within Saudi Arabia, requiring supervisors, researchers, doctoral level practitioners. And so certainly that remains a goal and a continued area of advancement for ABA in the region. But as I said, many of these goals are similar to the goals that perhaps were present back when Noor Al-Qassab started his efforts, and even before that, and certainly were present upon the initiation of both of the ABAI chapters in Saudi Arabia and both of the higher education programs that were developed. These goals have intensified, certainly, but more importantly, they have persevered. And perhaps that's the most important reason for studying the history of our science: to remember how far we've come, to reflect on our present, and to remind ourselves of all we have left to achieve. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you today. It's been an honor. I take the title of godmother with pride, and I hope you have a wonderful symposium. Happy World Behavior Analysis Day.